Once dominant in Palestinian politics, Fatah is now struggling to regroup in a long-delayed conference to be held inside the Palestinian territories. But can the movement make a new start, and could it shape a new approach towards a powerful Hamas? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. For the first time in 20 years, leaders from the same Palestinian movement will meet in Bethlehem this week. Fatah members from across the Palestinian territories and abroad are meeting for 3 days of talks. They want to reunite the party in the hope they can restart dialogue with Israel. But the movement has been losing popularity and has been dogged by scandal, as Bethan Howe explains.
Founded in the 1950s by Yasser Arafat, Fatah members carried out thousands of attacks on Israel, hoping to liberate Palestinian land. In the 60s, the group joined the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Fatah became the largest Palestinian political faction. The group was a key player in the Oslo Peace Accords of the 90s. It was instrumental in the creation of the Palestinian Authority and its security forces. By 2003, both the US and Israel were negotiating directly with Fatah members. But its popularity has waned. In the 2006 Palestinian elections, Fatah lost Gaza to its rival Hamas. There have been allegations of corruption, nepotism and inefficiency. There's also an increasing internal fight between what's seen as the Fatah old guard and the new guard who want to take over. And most recently, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has been accused of plotting the assassination of Yasser Arafat when he was leader. Now, what was the strongest political Palestinian faction is riddled with internal conflicts that may be difficult to overcome. Bethan Howe, Inside Story.
Well, joining us now are our guests in Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti. He's Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. In Nablus, Abdul-Sattar Qasim, he's a Professor of Political Science at An-Najah National University. And in London, Ian Black, he's Middle East Editor at the British newspaper The Guardian. Welcome, gentlemen, all. Mr. Black, if I could start with you. In your view, how much trouble is Fatah in?
Well, I think it's in a lot of trouble. This is the first time it's been able to hold this Congress, as you've said, for 20 years. If you think back to where the Palestinians were then, 1989, and where they are now, I mean, apart from the return to the occupied territories after the Oslo Agreement, it's hard to see that very much progress has been made towards the achievement of the historical goals of the Palestinian national movement, of which Fatah is the main element. That's one thing. I think the second thing one would have to say is that Fatah was once so dominant, so much the central part of that nationalist movement. It's now very seriously challenged by Hamas, the Islamist movement, which controls Gaza, and which is posing a very, very serious threat, I think, even to the historical dominance of Fatah in Palestinian politics. So achievements in terms of the historic goals of Palestinian nationalism, and a challenge to the very position of Fatah as the standard bearer of that movement. So this is an important Congress, and it comes at a very important moment, and everything looks fairly difficult.
And Mr. Barghouti, in broader terms, explain for us how important it is for Palestinians and for the issue of peace in the region as a whole that Fatah re-energizes itself, if you like.
It's quite important because Fatah, regardless of whether it has a majority or does not have a majority, it is one of the major movements in Palestine. And historically, it's been the largest for a very long time. And it has to decide what line it's going to take. And I think Fatah has suffered a lot because it has been trapped in the Oslo process since 1993. And there was some sort of a loss of vision in a way. And that was probably one of the main causes why they could not hold their Congress for such a long time. The question today for them is whether they will be able to reactivate themselves as a leading part or as an important part of the national liberation movement, or they will stick to becoming just part of the authority. That is, in my opinion, the most important challenge. The second one is whether they will be part of a creation of a democratic process in Palestine, regaining democracy in Palestine, or we will see something that looks like a one-party rule in West Bank by Fatah and a one-party rule in Gaza Strip by Hamas. The main part that suffered in the Palestinian situation because of the division between Fatah and Hamas has been the Palestinian democracy. So the issue of unity and the ability of Fatah to be part of reunifying Palestinians under one national unified leadership that can include everybody and all trends is one of the most important challenges that is facing the movement and the Congress, in my belief.
You suggest a lot of challenges, a lot of changes are required. Abdul-Sattar, Qasim, are you expecting any major changes to come out of this conference, this Congress?
No, I am not expecting much out of this Congress, actually, because I think Fatah is trapped by two factors. First, it's fragmented into so many centers of power, and each center of these is connected with either a state in the region or on the international level. They are financed and directed by so many states. The second is that Fatah is not independent financially. It depends mainly on the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian Authority receives its finances from the donating countries. And the money that the donating countries give are controlled mainly by Israel and the United States. So Fatah actually is under the grip of the Israeli occupation, and I don't think that they are going to make radical changes concerning either the political process or the internal relations with Hamas and other Palestinian organizations. So I think it is going to be an extension of the other congresses that were held historically, and they never made any dramatic changes or never faced the challenges that met the Palestinians at the time. This is not going to be any different this time.
Okay, so not much optimism there. But Mr. Black, we talked about fragmentation of Fatah, if you like. What can defragment Fatah? And lots of people are pointing towards the young guard, but will the old guard let them in?
Well, the sort of comments that we've been hearing in the last few weeks as the build-up to the Congress has taken place, it does reflect a general sense of pessimism about the prospects for radical change. The structure of the situation doesn't lead itself to a real sense of renewal. The feeling is, I think, that the old guard, to use the expression of Mahmoud Abbas and the historic leaders of Fatah, are not going away. They're still there, and they're still going to be controlling probably the main decision-making body of Fatah, the Central Committee. Now, that's a relatively small committee. It's 21 people. I think the hope of the younger generation, the young guard, those who want to bring about change, is that at the lower level, the Revolutionary Council, which has historically been had a sort of supervisory role, if you like, within the organization, there may be more prospect for movement there, for younger people to come in and to play a role that can influence policy making at higher levels. I think that's the sort of limit of ambition. There are very interesting questions.
Can I just jump in there just for a second? Because
sure.
if the veterans are preventing the young guard, the younger generations from coming in, there isn't any hope at all for the party, is there?
Well, I don't think it's completely black and white. I think that some change is possible. For example, one of the candidates, or one of the likely candidates, I think, because he's in prison for the Central Committee, is Barghouti, who is clearly an important figure. He's very charismatic as a Fatah leader. He's serving life terms in prison for leading the intifada against the Israelis. If he can get into an executive position within the organization, his prospects for the future leadership are clearly much better. If, on the other hand, Mohammed Dahlan, who is the former security chief, much disliked and much discredited for his role in recent years, were to find his way into a leadership position. That would clearly send a pretty negative signal about the prospects for change. So it's not that nothing can happen. There'll be a lot of analysis, I think, after the events. If Barghouti gets in, if Dahlan gets in, the sort of people and the policies they represent who are on the Revolutionary Council, perhaps rather than the Central Committee. So like any political phenomenon, you'll need to look fairly closely at the detail of the results and see what that means for the future composition of the movement. But I do believe, I agree with the previous speaker in particular, that in the big picture, the prospects for radical change are not great. And that's partly because whatever Fatah does and whatever the Palestinians do, there are serious constraints on them. They're not alone. If the Palestinians could themselves solve their national struggle, deal with Israel, deal with the Americans, deal with everything else, then what happened in Fatah would be extremely important, but they're constrained. And they're also very constrained by the wider divisions within their own people between Fatah and Hamas. That's probably the most significant challenge, I would say, facing them today.
Okay, well, let's just pause the discussion for a moment at that point and take a look a little more at some background, because that very point, before peace deals can be struck between Israel and the Palestinian factions, the internal feuds between those factions will have to be dealt with, as Ian Black was just making plain. Hamas was created in the late 1980s. Their mandate was social welfare and armed resistance against Israel. Over time, they've relaxed their goals with Israel, and so they want Israel to withdraw to the land it was allocated before the 1967 war. They gained popularity, particularly in Gaza, as they proved to successfully administer health and education and managed to cut crime. They won elections in 2006, but failed to maintain a power-sharing government with Fatah. And violence then, of course, erupted between the two factions, and hundreds were killed from 2006 to 2007, until Fatah won in the West Bank and Hamas took over in Gaza. The Fatah leadership was criticised for what some perceive as a lack of action over Israel's war on Gaza earlier this year, making really any reconciliation even more difficult. So the question is, Mustafa Barghouti, if the first challenge to overcome internal divisions is that one, the next would be to overcome the even bigger divisions with Hamas.
Absolutely, but you see, both issues are related to one major issue, which is what is the program of Fatah and what will be the policy of Fatah. I do not totally agree with the fact that there is a generation competition here, that the matter is between old and new. I think there are also very serious policy sharp differences inside Fatah. And the big question here is whether Fatah wants to maintain its role as a national liberation movement. Some people think that the stage of national struggle is over and we are just about to have a Palestinian state. The truth is not, this is not correct. I mean, Israel has created an apartheid system. What is offering is nothing but clusters of ghettos. Without changing the balance of forces on the ground, you cannot see a real Palestinian state. And that requires movements that will struggle for the Palestinian freedom. So the question here that will face Fatah is how much it can present to its members and to the public a program which could lead the Palestinian people to freedom and to independence. If it does so, this will make the possibility of resolving the internal division much higher, because then the differences between Hamas and Fatah on policy issue will shrink. But if it maintains the existing line that the only way of struggle is to negotiate and negotiate and negotiate and nothing is coming out of negotiations, I think they will have a big problem. But at the end of the day, I think both Fatah and Hamas have to answer one very particular question. Do they believe in democracy or not? True democracy, which means alternation of power, which means accepting the results of democratic elections when they take place, which means insisting on having these democratic elections at the end of the day, and to stop thinking that either of them have inherited the Palestinian people. I think that is a very crucial point for accepting a principle of democracy and unity, and that means real readiness on the side of Fatah to accept the principle of creating unified national leadership where people will be represented according to the democratic vote of the Palestinian people. One very more important issue here that is frequently ignored is that Fatah lost a lot of its base after Oslo Agreement in the diaspora, among the Palestinian diaspora. And we are talking here about half the Palestinian people, no less than 6 million people who live in the diaspora and who have been in the forefront of supporting Fatah historically. Losing them is not something good for the future of the movement. And I believe the future movement of Palestine is the one that will be able to unify not only between different Palestinian factions inside, but also that would be able to unify the aspirations and the movement and the activity and the effectively of Palestinians inside and in the diaspora as well.
Okay, let's bring in Mr. Qasim. Do you think it's possible that Hamas and Fatah will reconcile their differences?
It's very hard. It's very hard. There are so many contradictory positions here in Palestine, and it's very hard to get both sides together. And we have to note first that this Congress of Fatah now is held under the umbrella of the Israeli occupation. And without the permission of the Israelis to have some Palestinians get in the West Bank, this Congress probably could not have been held or would not be held. So this means that there are requirements that that Fatah movement has to pay for the occupation in return. The second point, that Fatah itself, since 2006, has been under the protection of the Israeli occupation here in the West Bank. Without the Israeli occupation, it would have lost its status to Hamas. Hamas could have taken over the West Bank in the same way it took over in Gaza. And third, it's very hard to talk about a free political will inside Fatah because they are controlled by the financial resources. Without these financial resources that come from the donating countries to the Palestinian Authority, Fatah would collapse, would not stand there. So those who are convening now in Bethlehem or after tomorrow will be convening, it's very hard for them to decide things that might upset those who pay the money, might upset the donating countries, the United States and Israel. That's why I think they will be talking within their own centers of power, that the balance in the internal centers of power, not in the sense that they will get together with Hamas. Besides, we have warnings from the United States, Israel, and the Europeans that if Fatah becomes closer to Hamas, then all the financial assistance would disappear. The Europeans and the Americans, the Israelis will stop financing the Palestinian Authority.
Okay, you're talking about financial issues there. Forgive me for jumping in there, but you're talking about financial issues. There's also the issue of...
The financial issue...
No, go ahead.
Yeah, the financial issue is the most important. Actually, it's the crucial one. Without this financial issue, without the finances they receive from the Palestinian Authority, I don't think that they will continue to function. They will just collapse and everybody should try to seek a job somewhere.
Okay, so that's one thing. Financial issues are one thing. And another very major issue is the issue of corruption. The rank and file are very disgruntled because of the issue of corruption. What do you say to that, Mr. Black?
Well, it's clear that in the internal Palestinian arena, the perception that Fatah was and is, many people still believe, corrupt, has been damaging to its reputation. You don't have to spend very long in anywhere in Palestine or in the diaspora or the Arab world to hear people talking about those sort of issues. And the perception is that Hamas, by contrast, provides clean government. Its members, its leaders are not corrupt, are not lining their own pockets, and it's very much part of that perception, if you like, about the decline of this historic national movement. I think the fundamental difficulty is, if you sort of cast it in slightly larger against a larger background, that Fatah is a liberation movement which has become a ruling party. And it's a ruling party and a government where fundamental, indeed existential issues about that national movement, borders, territory, independence, those huge questions have not been resolved. And it's being painted increasingly as a tool, a collaborator, if you like, with the Israeli authorities and the United States behind them. So the corruption charges, the image, go together with a sense that politically it's compromised itself. I think, and altogether, it makes a very, very toxic mix. I don't think corruption by itself is something that's will prove fatal to Fatah, but I think the charge of corruption, the perception of corruption, together with the sense of political failure, not delivering the goods, is a pretty dangerous combination, and that's what's contributed to the sense of crisis on the eve of this Congress.
It's interesting that point you make, this kind of transformation from liberation movement to ruling party, and it's kind of made it struggle to maintain authority. Is something that you would concur with, Mustafa Barghouti?
Absolutely, of course, it's a major issue, and you see, the whole situation would have been different if we really had liberation and a state. I mean, there are governments in some places which are not very democratic, but they still run the country, and they have corruption in some places, and they still run the country. But the question here is, do we have a country? We don't. We have an authority under occupation. And by the way, the same applies to Gaza. I mean, there is another authority under occupation, a different kind of occupation. In both cases, we live in prisons. And when it comes to the issue of corruption, I think the main issue here is about political aspect of it, and that is the system of nepotism and clientelism, whether it is practiced in the West Bank or in Gaza Strip. In both cases, nepotism and clientelism is a form of lack of democracy and the worst form of political corruption. And that is what should be avoided. And here I would say that it leads to very dangerous phenomena, like preventing the delegates of Fatah from attending the Congress in Bethlehem, which is unacceptable from the side of Hamas, or leading to severe political arrests that are taking place in West Bank, which is also unacceptable against Hamas.
Okay, I'm just going to interrupt you there, sir, because we're running out of time, and I just want to ask this question. With President Obama at the helm in the White House, if there was ever a time for Palestinians to get their act together, this is it, isn't it, Mr. Qasem?
Well, I don't think that the Americans would agree that the Palestinians should get together. Unless Hamas just moves to the side of Fatah, recognizes Israel, recognizes the conditions of Oslo and other accords. If that happens, yes, the United States would be happy to see the Palestinians get together. But with the present stance of Hamas and the general stance of the position here in the West Bank and Gaza, I don't think the Americans would be happy. And they always warn that if the Palestinians get together, they will not be receiving, as I said, any financial assistance. And that happened after the Palestinians made the agreement in Mecca in 2007. The Americans and the donating countries stopped financing the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinians have to fight each other. And that's what we say, that the Americans are seeking actually a blood for a bread. You Palestinians should kill each other, so you will be able to eat bread. If you don't do so, then the bread will not get to the West Bank.
Okay, Ian Black, you're Middle East editor for the Guardian newspaper in Britain. How do you think you'll be framing your editorial once this Congress is over?
Well, again, I think you need to keep in sight the wider picture here. The disunity, the divisions within Fatah are an expression of Palestinian weakness. The Palestinians are very weak, they're very divided. I slightly disagree with Mr. Qasem. I think that in the context of what President Obama is trying to do, I think for the first time in many years we've seen a genuine drive by an American administration to try to resolve this most intractable of conflicts, the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. I think that the United States, assuming its goodwill here, for many people that is a big assumption, it's true, but assuming goodwill, I think that the United States, other Western countries which want to see this conflict resolved, do need to see a resolution of these Palestinian divisions. I agree that it is unlikely that the United States or Europeans, and certainly Israel, are going to deal directly with Hamas. I believe that it is necessary for the Palestinians, Fatah and Hamas, to come together to try to resolve, or at least to fudge their differences in order to present a united front, so that there can be some kind of peace process and negotiation from a position on the Palestinian side of greater strength than there is at the moment. You have the most right-wing government Israel has ever had, and you have Palestinian divisions of unprecedented depth and bitterness. It seems to me it is a matter of Palestinian self-interest to try and do something about that and to close those gaps within Fatah and between Fatah and Hamas. And I think that's the wider context that we need to look at. Will much change? People don't seem to be very optimistic, and I can agree that there's all sorts of reasons to be pessimistic. Is it an imperative to try to advance Palestinian unity for the sake of the Palestinians? I would say yes, absolutely it is.
All right, that's it. No more time, gentlemen. Ian Black, Mustafa Barghouti, Abdul-Sattar Qasim, thanks very much indeed for your time. And thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story. As ever, we're always happy to receive any comments, any suggestions. Just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, it's goodbye.